The stranger next door wasn't supposed to be this irresistible. A loud car horn cut through the air, snapping me out of my daze as I realized I was smack in the middle of the street, one step away from becoming a hood ornament. I stumbled back onto the sidewalk, muttering a quick "sorry" to the driver who sped off, cursing under his breath. I'd zoned out again. It wasn't just the noise or the near-death experience that had me rattled. It was the guy across the street. The one who, for a split second, I could have sworn was Mark Grayson. Yeah, that Mark. My ex. I know what you're probably thinking already, but let me stop you right there and tell you that I'm not the type to get hung up on someone. It's just not my style. But then again, I didn't expect to get ghosted either. It's been a year, and trust me, I know I should be over it by now. Everyone tells me that, and they're right, but here I am, still not over it. The guy didn't just break up with me, he vanished. No awkward conversation, no "we need to talk" moment. One day we were planning a weekend trip, and the next, poof, gone, like he never existed. So yeah, maybe I'm a little messed up over it. Who wouldn't be? I glanced back across the street, but the guy who had sparked the flashback was already gone, swallowed up by the crowd. Figures. Even the reminder of Mark was fleeting. Ever since the incident, I had long decided that dating wasn't for me. I mean, what was the point? No more heartbreak, no more wondering what I'd done wrong, no sleepless nights replaying the conversation, trying to figure out what happened. None of that anymore. Why put myself through that again? 1 week later. I'll tell you exactly why I could put myself through all of that again. Leo. His name was Leo Brothwick. I first met him one afternoon in the hallway. I was minding my own business, heading back from the grocery store, trying to avoid human interaction like usual, when this guy appeared out of nowhere, all smiles and charm. "Hey neighbor," Leo said, flashing me a smile that brightened up the entire place. "I'm Leo Brothwick, just moved in." I wasn't prepared for this. I was still in don't talk to strangers mode, so I gave him a polite but distant nod. "Jamie," I muttered, trying not to make eye contact for too long. I figured that'd be the end of it, right? Like, he'd take the hint and move on? Nope. "So, how's the neighborhood? Good pizza spots around here?" Leo asked, undeterred. His tone was light, like we'd known each other for years. I could tell he was one of those effortlessly charming types, the kind that gets along with everyone. I shrugged, gripping my grocery bag a little tighter. Yeah, nothing extraordinary, just decent pizza. And that's where I thought I'd leave it. But of course, Leo wasn't bothered by my cold front. If anything, he seemed more amused than anything else. He leaned casually against the wall like we were old friends, not two strangers awkwardly meeting in the hallway. "Well, good to know. I'll have to check them out myself sometime," he said, still smiling. "See you around, Jamie. It was a pleasure meeting you today." And just like that, he was gone. Back to his apartment, like he didn't care that I wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. 3 days later. After the first encounter with Leo, I made it my personal mission to avoid him at all costs. I wasn't interested in making a new buddy, not with everything that was going on with me. New people always seemed so eager to dive into your life, and frankly, I wasn't in the mood for any deep dives, so I became a bit of an expert in the art of dodging. I timed my grocery runs at the exact minute I thought Leo wouldn't be around. Early mornings, safe bet. Middle of the day when everyone was at work, perfect. Even grabbing my mail became a covert operation. I peeked through the door, scanning the hallway for any sign of him before making a mad dash to the mailbox like I was some kind of secret agent on a mission. And if I spotted him from a distance, I'd turn around so fast it would make your head spin. But for all my expert dodging tactics, something strange happened, or well, something didn't happen. I stopped seeing Leo entirely. It was like he'd vanished. At first I thought maybe I'd perfected my avoidance game. I was winning. But then a few days passed, and the usual Leo sightings just didn't happen. It started to bug me a little. Not because I missed him, let's get that straight. It's just that the sudden silence was weird, suspicious even. One day you're dodging Mr. Charming like a ninja, and the next he's disappeared. People don't just fall off the face of the earth, right? Not again. So now I was curious, just a little. I wasn't exactly ready to start knocking on his door and checking on him like some concerned neighbor. Because, let's be real, I was still committed to my anti-new people campaign. But it got to a point where I found myself glancing at his door a bit too often, listening for any sign of life. Maybe he was just busy, or maybe he finally got the hint. 1 month later. It took about a month, but I saw Leo again. In fact, I began to see him a little too much. I began to suspect that maybe he had left for a short trip just after moving in, perhaps something work-related. I guess I'd never know because I was still recovering from the emotional bomb Mark had dropped on me. and I didn't need someone like Leo trying to be my buddy. It helped that I was still expertly playing keep away, except Leo didn't seem to take the hint. Nope, he ignored all of my antics and avoidance techniques with expert ease, and it left me reeling. Over the next couple of weeks, I ran into him more than I cared to admit. In the lobby, by the mailboxes, even at the corner coffee shop, every time it was the same routine. He'd flash me a friendly smile, say something casual, like he was testing the waters to see how much of a conversation he could drag me into. It wasn't annoying exactly, it was persistent. Not the kind of persistence that gets in your face, but the slow, steady kind. The kind that wears you down without you even realizing it. I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice. He started with small things, asking about my day when we crossed paths, leaving a cup of coffee at my door with a note that read, "Thought you could use a pick-me-up, Leo." Or he'd casually mention some new restaurant he'd found nearby and suggest we check it out sometime like we were already friends. And every time I'd brush him off. Politely, of course, but I wasn't about to let someone into my life, not after what happened with Mark. I'd learned my lesson. People don't stick around, so why bother getting attached? But here's the thing. Leo didn't push, not once. The moment I started shutting down, he'd back off with that easy smile, like it didn't bother him at all. And maybe that's what messed with my head the most, because slowly it started to wear me down. I wasn't used to people like Leo, the kind who respected boundaries but somehow made it harder to keep those walls up. He was like a steady drip of charm, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, he got to me, even though I didn't want to admit it. By the time we ran into each other at the grocery store at the end of the month, something had shifted. I don't even remember what he said, but somehow I found myself responding to his small talk. Actually responding, not just grunting or nodding like I usually did. It's something about the price of avocados being ridiculous, Leo was saying. His expression completely serious, but the grin tugging at the corners of his mouth gave him away. Before I knew it, I was actually laughing. When did I start laughing at dumb jokes? I shook my head, trying to get a grip, but there I was, mid-aisle, grinning like a fool. "How's the pizza hunt going?" I asked, catching myself before I started grinning again. I was actually curious now. The guy was persistent, I'd give him that. Leo leaned casually against the shelves, his smile widening as if we'd known each other all our lives. "Still just decent," he said with a shrug, "but maybe I haven't found the right person to try it with." There it was again, another flirt, thrown in so casually like he wasn't waiting to see how I'd react. I blinked down at the oranges in my hand, focusing on them like they were the most fascinating thing in the world. But I couldn't pretend I didn't hear it. His words hung in the air between us like some kind of challenge. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that familiar urge to walk away. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I was getting used to Leo's persistence, or maybe it was just his easygoing nature. Whatever it was, I didn't hate it. "So, how about you?" Leo asked, breaking into my thoughts. "Any big weekend plans?" I shook my head, playing it off. "Nah, just the usual, laundry, Netflix, avoiding human interaction, the usual weekend routine." He chuckled softly, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "Sounds thrilling. Maybe I'll crash your Netflix party one day." I snorted, pretending to check out the lemons now. "Yeah, not sure my couch can keep up with 2 people. Or maybe I'll drag you out for pizza," Leah said smoothly, still watching me with that easygoing grin. To give you a chance to judge decent for yourself." I narrowed my eyes, but couldn't help smirking. "You're relentless, you know that?" "Only when it's worth it." His tone softened just enough to catch me off guard. I stared at him for a second too long, blinking when he raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh," I muttered, feeling like I was losing whatever edge I had in this conversation. My head was swimming with too many thoughts, and I wasn't sure I liked where they were leading. "Anyway," Leo said after a beat, straightening up and grabbing his own groceries, "I'm heading out, but I could walk you home if you want." I paused, staring at him like he just suggested something insane. "Walk me home?" He shrugged, nonchalant as ever. "Yeah, it's getting dark and it wouldn't hurt to have company. Plus, I'm curious how your Netflix choices hold up in conversation." I opened my mouth to decline out of habit, but stopped myself. It wasn't like he was asking for much, just a walk. And I had to admit, the idea didn't sound half as bad as it might have a week ago. "All right," I said, surprising myself. "But if your pizza suggestions suck, don't think I won't hold it against you." Leo laughed, grabbing his bag. "Deal. Now come on, let's see if this walk can beat your usual thrilling weekend plans." I rolled my eyes, but as we headed for the exit together, I realized I wasn't dreading the company. Not even a little. The next week. For some strange reason, I didn't run into Leo for the rest of the week. A small part of me worried that he might have gone on another little trip indefinitely. A shame because I was just starting to tolerate him too. Eventually, I caught wind of him the following Friday. It has been one of those days where everything felt like a heavy weight dragging me down. Work was a disaster, and the thought of going home just to sit in my empty apartment didn't exactly lighten my mood. All I wanted was to crawl into bed and shut the world out. I was halfway up the steps to my building when I saw him. He was sitting there, earbuds in, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. I debated just walking past him, pretending I didn't notice, but before I could make my escape, he looked up. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice warm and disarmingly casual. I sighed, pulling out one of my earbuds. "You have no idea." He shifted over on the step, patting the spot next to him. "Want to sit for a bit?" Part of me wanted to brush him off, retreat into my apartment where I could be alone with my thoughts, but for some reason, I sat down. We sat there in silence for a minute or two, the kind that felt oddly comfortable. Leo didn't push me to talk, and that was what made it easier. Before I knew it, I was telling him more than I'd told anyone in months. "It's just been a rough year," I muttered, staring at my hands. "Work sucks, everything sucks." Leo didn't say anything, just nodded like he was waiting for me to continue. "And my ex, Mark, he ghosted me. Early this year too, completely out of the blue. I wasn't sure why I was telling him this, but once I started, the words wouldn't stop. We were planning a trip together, then one day he just disappeared. No explanation, no we need to talk, nothing. I felt my chest tighten just talking about it. The pain of it still lingered, even after all this time. I hadn't spoken about Mark in months, but here I was spilling my guts to a guy I barely knew. Leo stayed quiet, listening. Really listening. He wasn't just nodding for the sake of it, he actually cared about what I was saying. "And the worst part is, I still can't move on," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's like every time I think I'm over it, something reminds me of him, and it's like I'm right back at square one." "I'm sorry you went through that," he said softly, his voice full of genuine empathy. "That's rough. No one should have to deal with that alone." There was something in his tone, something that made me believe he meant it. Not just saying it to make me feel better, but because he understood. That was the first time in a long time I didn't feel so alone. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet, letting his words sink in. We sat there for a while longer, neither of us feeling the need to fill the silence. And for the first time in a year, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't carrying all this weight by myself anymore. At some point, Leo reached out, brushing a stray piece of hair from my face. The gesture was small, but it felt intimate, more than just a casual touch. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't pull away. I half expected him to push things further, to lean in or make some flirty comment, but he didn't. He just smiled, soft, reassuring, and pulled his hand back, like he knew I wasn't ready for anything more. And that made it harder, because the truth was, part of me didn't want to be alone anymore, but another part was still too scared to let anyone in. Not after Mark. "I should probably get inside," I said after a while, standing up and brushing off my pants. Leo nodded, standing up with me. "Yeah, of course." We exchanged a quiet goodnight, and as I made my way inside, I couldn't help but feel like something had shifted, like maybe this time, things could be different. 3 days later. I'm not sure what possessed me to do it, but I invited Leo over for dinner. It was impulsive, which is very unlike me, but I kept thinking about that night on the steps. The way he listened, the way he didn't push me, the way his presence made me feel, well, okay. And okay was good. It was more than I'd felt in a while. Still, when the day came, I was a mess. I overthought everything. From the menu, did spaghetti seem too basic? Should I have gone for something more impressive? To how my apartment looked? Was it too clean, too lived in? Could Leo tell I'd stress clean the entire place an hour before he showed up? By the time he knocked on my door, I was half tempted to text him, tell him I wasn't feeling well, and cancel the whole thing. But when I opened the door, there he was, casual, smiling, holding a bottle of wine like we weren't standing on the edge of something. "Hey," Leo said, his voice as warm as always. "Hope I'm not too early." I shook my head, stepping aside to let him in. "No, you're right on time. Wine's a good choice." "Thanks. I thought I'd bring something to class up the joint," he winked, making me laugh despite my nerves. Dinner, surprisingly, was easy. We talked, we laughed, and for once, I wasn't constantly overanalyzing every word that came out of my mouth. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sitting there waiting for something to go wrong. There was no mark, no fear, no second guessing. Leo was real. He wasn't just some charming guy who showed up in my life by chance. He genuinely cared. I could see that now. After dinner, we started cleaning up. The clinking of dishes climbed over our conversation. "I gotta say," Leo said, drying a plate and giving me a sideways glance, "you're full of surprises. When you said spaghetti, I wasn't expecting gourmet spaghetti." I chuckled, rinsing another dish. "Gourmet? It's literally just noodles and sauce." "Yeah, but you did that thing with the garlic bread," Leo said, pointing a dish towel at me like I'd just unlocked some kind of cooking magic. "That made it special. A little crispy, a little buttery." "Let me guess," I teased, handing him another plate. "Your kitchen's a disaster zone, isn't it?" He laughed, leaning closer as he took the plate from my hands. "Define disaster zone." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm guessing you don't even own a skillet, do you?" "Listen," Leo grinned. "I've survived off takeout for this long, haven't I?" I couldn't help but laugh. "That's not surviving, that's just living on the edge." Leo gave me an exaggerated look of offense. "Hey, some of us enjoy the thrill of wondering if our delivery guy's going to show up with the right order." "Right," I rolled my eyes. "You're truly living the dream." We fell into an easy rhythm, passing plates back and forth, Leo drying them as I washed. It was comfortable. Too comfortable. There was this moment, one of those quiet moments, where his hand brushed my arm as he reached for a dish, and my heart skipped a beat. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. I didn't want to. Leo stood close behind me now, his warmth creeping into my space, making it hard to focus on the task at hand. His fingers grazed my arm again, this time lingering a little longer. "I've got to ask," he said, voice a little softer, a little more serious. "What made you invite me over tonight?" I paused, the dish still in my hand, the question catching me off guard. I could feel him waiting behind me, his presence pulling me closer to something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "I don't know," I said honestly, still not turning around. "I just felt like it was time." There was a beat of silence, and then Leo's voice came, low and steady. "Time for what?" "For this," I whispered, finally setting down the dish and turning to face him. Our eyes met, and I could see the unspoken question in his gaze, waiting, patient like he'd been from the start. He wasn't pushing, but I could feel it, the pull, the connection between us that had been building for weeks. I didn't think, I didn't overanalyze or second guess like I normally would. I just leaned in. Our lips met, slow and tentative at first, like we were testing the waters. But the moment we connected, everything else fell away. It wasn't rushed or frenzied, but it was gentle, full of all the things neither of us had said out loud. For the first time in a while, I felt wanted. Not like a distraction or a rebound, but genuinely, truly wanted. The kiss deepened, and the tension that had been building between us finally snapped. Leo's hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I didn't resist. "I'm glad you invited me," he whispered against my lips, his breath warm against my skin. "I've been waiting for this." I smiled, pressing my forehead against his, feeling the weight of it all. The running, the pushing people away, the fear of getting hurt again, falling away. "I have too," I admitted, my voice barely audible. We stayed like that for a moment, wrapped in each other, neither of us wanting to break the spell. It felt easy, like maybe I didn't have to keep my walls up. With Leo, I didn't need them. No more running, no more fear. Just this. 2 weeks later. The next 2 weeks were straight out of a movie, and not just any movie, one of those feel-good rom-coms where everything falls into place so effortlessly that you start to wonder if you're dreaming. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be this easy, right? Dating or whatever it is we were doing was supposed to be hard, full of awkward silences and stumbling over text messages, but with Leo it felt like everything just clicked. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Every time he smiled at me or touched my arm, I felt like I was being let in on some big secret, one that only he and I shared. And the best part, he lived right next door. I'd never been in a situationship with a neighbor before, but let me tell you, it was amazing. No stressing about long drives across the city or awkward goodbyes when you're not sure if it's too soon to spend the night. Nope. Leo and I had the ultimate setup. We could have dinner together, hang out, and then retreat to our own spaces if we needed it. The ease of it all was almost terrifying. There were nights where we'd order takeout and binge watch TV or just hang out on the steps of our building, talking about everything and nothing. But there wasn't any pressure to be anything more than ourselves, and it was refreshing. Leo had this way of making me feel grounded, Like I didn't have to carry the weight of everything alone anymore. With him, I didn't feel like the guy who got ghosted by his ex a year ago. I was just Jamie, and he liked me for me. I could see it in the way he looked at me, like I was worth his time, like I was the center of his attention. Even when we were doing the most mundane things like grabbing groceries or deciding whether to order pizza or sushi, he'd have this way of making me feel important. He'd listen, really listen. And there were those moments, the quiet in-between moments where we'd just be sitting there, not saying anything, but I could feel him next to me, feel the way he wanted to be there. It wasn't just convenience or proximity. It was more than that. It was like we were building something, brick by brick, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was actually part of that process. I kept waiting for something to go wrong, for that nagging feeling of uncertainty to creep back in, but it never did. Not with Leo. Every day he made me feel like I could breathe a little easier, like the weight of the world wasn't quite so heavy anymore. And the fact that he lived right next door, that was just the cherry on top. That weekend. It had been a long day, and by some stroke of luck, I managed to clock out of work a few hours earlier than usual. On my way back home, I thought I'd stop by Leo's place and surprise him. We'd been spending more and more time together lately, and I figured, why not keep the streak going? When I got to his door, something felt off. The door was opened. Not wide open, but cracked, just enough that it sent a shiver down my spine. I knocked once. Leo? No answer. I nudged the door a little more, quietly stepping inside. Leo, you home? Still no response. I glanced around his apartment. His jacket was tossed over a chair, and there were 2 half-empty coffee cups on the coffee table, alongside what looked like a manila folder. Naturally, I moved closer, the folder catching my eye. I'd never seen one of these in real life before. I wasn't a snoop by any means, but something about that folder, I couldn't help myself. I opened it. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a random folder, it was filled with papers, photos, and notes, all about Mark, my ex, the guy who'd ghosted me and disappeared from my life without a trace. There were photos of him, some I hadn't even seen before, and documents detailing a lot about him, his family, his work history, even a list of places he'd been spotted in the past year. My heart pounded in my chest as I began to piece it together. Leo wasn't just some charming guy I'd met by chance. All of this had been orchestrated for some reason. It had something to do with Mark. But why? What was Leo's angle? And then I noticed the 2 coffee cups. He hadn't been drinking alone. He'd been talking to someone about Mark recently. I was still frozen in place when the door behind me creaked open. I spun around, folder in hand, to find Leo standing there holding a FedEx package. Jamie, what are you doing here? His voice was fairly calm, but I could see the panic in his eyes as he spotted the folder. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice cracking as I waved the folder at him. Why do you have all of this on Mark? Leo's face paled, and he took a step toward me, but I backed away, shaking my head. Jamie, just let me explain. No, I cut him off, chest tight, with anger and confusion. Who are you, Leo? Why are you looking into Mark? Why do you have all of this? My voice broke on the last word. His face twisted with guilt, but I wasn't sticking around to hear his excuses. I turned on my heel and bolted out of the door, my mind racing. The person I started to trust, the person I'd let in, had been hiding something this entire time. I didn't make it far. Leo was right behind me, calling out my name, telling me to stop, to just hear him out. But I couldn't, not with everything I'd just seen. I couldn't believe it. I burst through the building's front doors, making a beeline for the street. I spotted a taxi, waved it down, desperate to get away. But just as I reached for the door, Leo grabbed my arm, his grip firm but not forceful. Jamie, please, he begged, his voice low and frantic. Just let me explain. I whipped around to face him, tears welling up in my eyes. Explain what, Leo? That this was all some setup? That you've been lying to me this whole time? He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, he looked at me, his face full of regret. That was the final straw. I felt the weight of it all crash down on me, and before I could stop myself, I collapsed onto a nearby street bench, burying my face in my hands. I felt him sit down next to me, but he didn't say anything right away. The silence between us was thick, heavy with all the things that had gone unsaid. After what felt like an eternity, I finally looked up. Who are you really, Leo? He hesitated, then sighed, running a hand through his hair before meeting my eyes. Jamie, I'm an undercover cop. I blinked, the words not making sense. What? I've been tracking Mark, he continued, his voice soft but steady. For months. He's wanted in connection with a major investigation. I thought if I got close to you, I could find him. My heart shattered right there. Everything I thought had been real, everything between us, it was all a lie. Just a way for Leo to find Mark. I stared at him, my world crumbling. So what? This was all fake? You were just using me? Leo shook his head quickly, his eyes pleading. No, Jamie, I swear, that's not how it is. At first, yes, I was looking for Mark, but then I met you, and everything changed. But I couldn't hear it. I couldn't process it. All I knew was that the man I'd let into my life had been lying to me from the start, and with that, the world I thought I knew fell apart. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force. And stay wholesome.